The moment he laughed at her pain, he unknowingly turned himself into evidence. The courtroom in Richmond, Virginia, carried the kind of silence that never felt peaceful. It was cold, artificial, heavy with fluorescent light and years of buried anger trapped between gray walls and polished wooden benches. People sat stiffly beneath the massive state seal hanging above the judge's bench, pretending not to stare while secretly watching everything. The low hum of old air vents mixed with the rustle of paperwork and the occasional squeak of dress shoes against marble floors. It should have been just another hearing, another grieving family asking questions nobody wanted to answer. But the tension in the room felt different that morning, sharper somehow, like everyone could sense a storm approaching even if they didn't know where it would begin. Vanessa Cole sat alone near the front row, dressed in a dark navy blazer with a thin leather folder resting quietly on her lap. Her posture was calm, controlled, almost unreadable, the kind of composure that unsettled people who expected emotion. Her natural curls were pulled neatly behind her shoulders, and although exhaustion rested faintly beneath her eyes, there was something else there too, something colder than grief. Across the courtroom, Officer Daniel Mercer leaned lazily against the rail near the prosecution table, the silver badge on his chest reflecting the harsh ceiling lights. Tall, broad-shouldered, confident in the way men become after years of never being questioned, Mercer scanned the room with visible boredom until his eyes landed on Vanessa. A smirk slowly spread across his face. "You again," he muttered loud enough for nearby officers to hear. A few chuckled under their breath. Vanessa didn't respond. She simply opened her folder and continued reading. Mercer pushed himself away from the rail and walked closer, his polished boots echoing through the silent courtroom. "You know," he said with a mocking laugh, "most people eventually realize when it's time to move on." More quiet laughter followed. Nobody stopped him. Not the bailiff standing near the wall. Not the court clerk typing at her desk. Not even Judge Harold Whitman, who barely glanced up from the papers in front of him. Vanessa slowly lifted her eyes toward Mercer, her expression steady enough to make the smile on his face twitch for half a second. "I'm here for justice," she said softly. Mercer laughed louder this time, shaking his head while looking around the room for approval. "Justice?" he repeated. "Lady, your brother's case was closed 2 years ago." The room fell still again. Somewhere in the back, someone coughed nervously. Vanessa remained motionless, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of the folder on her lap. "Closed," she said quietly, "doesn't always mean finished." Mercer let out another short laugh, dismissive and sharp. "That's cute," he replied. "You really think anyone in this building still cares?" But what Daniel Mercer didn't realize as he stood there laughing in front of an entire courtroom was that every word leaving his mouth was already being documented, every reaction already measured, every arrogant mistake already feeding an investigation far bigger than he could imagine. And the woman he believed was powerless had not come there seeking sympathy. She had come there to watch him expose himself. The silence inside the courtroom lingered long after Daniel Mercer stepped away from Vanessa Cole, but it was no longer the ordinary silence of legal procedure. It felt tense now, unstable, like the room itself had started listening more carefully. Vanessa lowered her eyes back to the folder in her lap while the judge called the next matter on the docket, but her attention was somewhere else entirely. Every few seconds her fingers turned another page, revealing photographs, timelines, printed emails, and handwritten notes stacked with almost surgical precision. The thick file looked less like a grieving sister's collection of memories and more like something built over years by someone trained to notice details other people ignored. Judge Harold Whitman adjusted his glasses and glanced toward her again, this time with visible irritation. "Miss Cole," he said flatly, "this court has already reviewed the circumstances surrounding your brother's arrest." His tone carried the practiced exhaustion of a man used to dismissing uncomfortable conversations. "There is nothing further to reopen." Vanessa slowly looked up. "Then why were 6 pages removed from the arrest report?" she asked calmly. The question landed harder than anyone expected. Mercer straightened slightly near the rail. One of the younger officers exchanged a quick glance with another deputy. Even the court reporter briefly paused typing before continuing again. Judge Whitman frowned. "I do not know what you are implying." "I am not implying anything," Vanessa replied. "I am asking why the original report logged 18 pages. but the archive copy contains 12. Mercer let out a sharp laugh from across the room. You really came here counting paperwork? He asked mockingly. That is desperate even for you. Vanessa turned toward him slowly, her face unreadable. You signed the evidence transfer form at 9:14 that night, she said. But surveillance from the parking garage shows you leaving the building at 8:53. The smile on Mercer's face faded for the first time. It was small, almost invisible, but enough for the tension in the courtroom to tighten another degree. Judge Whitman cleared his throat quickly. This is not the place for conspiracy theories. Vanessa nodded once. You are right, she answered softly. It is the place for facts. Somewhere in the gallery, someone shifted nervously in their seat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while cold rain tapped faintly against the courthouse windows. Mercer stepped forward again, forcing another smirk onto his face. You know what I think, he said loudly. I think you cannot let go because blaming the police is easier than accepting reality. A few people lowered their eyes. Others watched Vanessa carefully, waiting for anger, waiting for her composure to crack. But she only reached into her folder and removed a single photograph. She placed it gently on the table in front of the judge. Reality, she said quietly, does not usually delete body camera footage exactly 4 minutes before an arrest. The courtroom froze. Mercer's jaw tightened instantly. Judge Whitman picked up the photograph with visible hesitation while Vanessa leaned back slightly in her chair, calm as ever. And for the first time that morning, Daniel Mercer stopped looking at her like she was powerless and started looking at her like she might actually know something dangerous. For several long seconds, nobody inside the courtroom spoke. Judge Harold Whitman continued staring at the photograph in his hand while the soft tapping of rain against the courthouse windows seemed suddenly louder than before. Officer Daniel Mercer folded his arms tightly across his chest, but the confidence he carried earlier had started to crack around the edges. Vanessa Cole noticed it immediately. People like Mercer always looked strongest when they believed nobody was paying attention. The moment scrutiny appeared, even slightly, the performance became harder to maintain. Vanessa closed her folder carefully and rested both hands on the table in front of her. Calm, steady, controlled. The exact opposite of what everyone expected from her. Judge Whitman finally placed the photograph back down. This hearing is not about police procedure, he said firmly, though his voice lacked the authority it carried earlier. Your brother's case has already been reviewed by Internal Affairs. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. 3 times, she replied. And all 3 reviews were signed by supervisors currently under federal audit. The words hit the room like a sudden drop in temperature. Mercer stepped forward immediately. That is enough, he snapped. You cannot come in here throwing around accusations because you are emotional. Vanessa looked at him quietly for a moment. Emotional, she repeated softly. Mercer pointed toward the folder in front of her. You have spent 2 years chasing ghosts because you cannot accept what happened. A faint smirk returned to his face as he glanced toward the officers standing near the wall. And now you are trying to turn this courtroom into some conspiracy documentary. A few nervous laughs echoed again, weaker this time. Vanessa slowly nodded as though she expected every word. Then she reached into the folder and removed another document. This one thinner, older, folded from years of handling. You know what I could never accept? She asked quietly. The fact that my brother called 911 asking for help 47 minutes before he was arrested. The room went still again. Mercer's expression hardened instantly. Vanessa continued speaking in the same calm tone, almost gentle, which somehow made every sentence feel heavier. Dispatch records show he reported being followed near East Marshall Street. She looked directly at Mercer now. Your patrol unit arrived 6 minutes later. Mercer shook his head dismissively. That proves nothing. Vanessa slid the paper slowly across the table toward the judge. Then maybe the missing dispatch audio does. Judge Whitman hesitated before taking the document. His eyes scanned the page quickly, and for the first time all morning, genuine discomfort crossed his face. Mercer noticed it too. What exactly are you trying to do here? He asked sharply. Vanessa leaned back slightly in her chair, while thunder rumbled faintly outside beyond the courthouse walls. I am trying to understand, she answered. Why every piece of evidence connected to my brother disappeared the moment your name appeared in the file. Mercer laughed again, but this time the sound came out strained and uneven. You really think anybody believes this? He asked. Vanessa held his gaze without blinking. "No," she said softly. "I think somebody already did." And somewhere near the courtroom entrance, almost unnoticed beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, a man in a dark charcoal suit quietly stepped inside, carrying a thin black briefcase. The man standing near the courtroom entrance did not speak when he entered, but somehow his presence changed the atmosphere immediately. He carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively move aside without understanding why. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked expensive without trying to, he paused near the back wall and surveyed the room carefully while rainwater glistened faintly across the shoulders of his overcoat. Vanessa Cole noticed him instantly, though her expression never changed. Officer Daniel Mercer followed her line of sight and frowned. "Court is already in session," he said impatiently. "You cannot just walk in here." The man ignored him completely. Instead, he opened the thin black briefcase in his hand and removed a small stack of documents clipped together with bright red tabs. Judge Harold Whitman stiffened the moment he saw them. Vanessa quietly folded her hands together on the table, while Mercer's irritation slowly shifted into something more uncertain. "Who exactly are you?" Mercer asked again, louder this time. The man finally looked at him. "Marcus Hale," he replied calmly. "Internal Oversight Division." The room seemed to shrink around those 3 words. One of the deputies near the wall straightened immediately. The court reporter stopped typing for a fraction of a second. Even Judge Whitman suddenly looked far more alert than before. Mercer forced out a dry laugh. "Oversight," he repeated. "Nobody told me there was an audit happening." Marcus Hale closed the briefcase carefully. "That was intentional." Silence swallowed the courtroom again. Vanessa lowered her eyes briefly toward the folder in front of her, almost as if she had expected this exact moment down to the second. Mercer noticed the movement and his expression darkened. "What is this?" he demanded while gesturing between them. "Some kind of setup?" Vanessa looked back at him calmly. "No," she answered softly. "A review." Judge Whitman quickly cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale," he interrupted, attempting to regain control of the room. "This hearing concerns a closed case. I fail to see why federal oversight would be necessary." Marcus stepped forward slowly and placed the red tab documents onto the judge's bench. "Because the closed case," he said evenly, "connects to 5 unresolved complaints involving evidence tampering, missing recordings, and procedural inconsistencies tied to Richmond Central Precinct." Mercer's jaw tightened instantly. "You cannot prove that." Marcus looked at him carefully for a long moment before answering. "Actually," he said, "we can." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while distant thunder rolled across the city outside. Vanessa remained perfectly still, but inside the courtroom, people had started noticing details they ignored before. The way she never reacted emotionally. The way every question she asked landed exactly where it hurt. The way Marcus Hale seemed completely unsurprised by anything she said. Mercer noticed it too. His confidence had not disappeared yet, but cracks were spreading through it faster now. "This is ridiculous," he muttered while loosening his collar slightly. "You are turning one tragic arrest into some fantasy corruption case." Vanessa slowly opened her folder again and removed a sealed envelope this time. Cream-colored. Official. Unmarked except for one federal seal stamped across the front. She placed it gently onto the table between herself and Mercer. "Then maybe you should explain," she said quietly, "why your department tried to bury this before today." Mercer stared at the envelope without touching it. And for the first time all morning, the room no longer looked at Vanessa Cole like a grieving woman chasing answers. They were beginning to look at her like someone who already had them. Officer Daniel Mercer kept his eyes locked on the sealed envelope sitting on the table, as though simply looking away might make it disappear. The earlier confidence in his posture had faded into stiffness now, the kind people carried when they suddenly realized the room was no longer under their control. Around him, the courtroom remained painfully quiet. Nobody whispered anymore. Nobody laughed. Even the deputies standing near the wall seemed unsure where to look. Vanessa Cole noticed every shift without reacting to any of them. She had spent too long studying rooms like this not to recognize the moment power quietly changed hands. Marcus Hale stood near the bench with his hands folded calmly in front of him, while Judge Harold Whitman slowly reached for the envelope. "This is highly irregular," the judge muttered, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. Vanessa looked toward him carefully. So was deleting evidence from an active file, she replied. Whitman froze for half a second before opening the envelope. Several official documents slid onto the bench beneath the bright fluorescent lights, each page marked with federal headers and investigative seals. Mercer immediately stepped forward. You cannot just bring federal paperwork into a local hearing without authorization, he snapped. Marcus Hale finally turned fully toward him. Authorization was signed 3 months ago, he said evenly. Mercer stared at him. By who? Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward Vanessa, and for the first time all morning, the smallest crack appeared in her calm expression. Not fear, not anger, something heavier. Memory. The rain outside intensified, streaking across the courthouse windows while distant sirens echoed somewhere beyond the downtown streets. Vanessa slowly looked back down at the folder in front of her. My brother believed the system would protect him, she said quietly. The courtroom listened carefully now. The night he called for help, he thought the officers arriving would save him. Mercer shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa continued speaking, her voice steady despite the pain resting underneath every word. For 2 years I kept asking myself the same question. She paused briefly. Why would every recording disappear unless somebody was protecting what happened? Nobody interrupted her. Judge Whitman remained silent behind the bench while Marcus Hale watched the room carefully, almost like he was measuring reactions. Vanessa lifted another photograph from the folder. This one older, creased from being carried too often. A smiling young black man standing beside a basketball court beneath summer sunlight. His name was Jordan Cole, she said softly. 26 years old. Elementary school basketball coach. Never arrested. Never violent. Never even had a parking ticket. Mercer looked away first. Vanessa noticed that too. But after his death, she continued, reports changed. Witnesses disappeared. Audio vanished. Officers transferred. Her eyes slowly returned to Mercer, and every trail somehow led back to the same people. Marcus Hale finally stepped closer to the bench. Officer Mercer, he said calmly. Do you know why federal oversight became involved? Mercer swallowed hard but forced a shrug. Because she complained loud enough? A few months earlier, that answer might have earned another laugh from the room. Now it only deepened the silence. Marcus opened the briefcase again and removed a thin digital recorder. Small, black, unremarkable. He placed it gently onto the table beside Vanessa's folder. No, he replied quietly. Because somebody inside your department started cooperating. Mercer's face lost color instantly. And for the first time since the hearing began, Vanessa Cole no longer looked like a woman asking the system for justice. She looked like someone preparing to dismantle it. The words hung in the courtroom like smoke nobody could clear away. Somebody inside the department had started cooperating. That single sentence changed everything. Officer Daniel Mercer stood frozen near the prosecution table, his eyes darting briefly toward the deputies by the wall, as if trying to calculate who might have betrayed him. The confidence that once filled the room around him was gone now, replaced by something tighter, more desperate. Vanessa Cole watched him carefully without saying a word. She had seen that look before during interviews, investigations, interrogations. It was the expression people wore when certainty began collapsing faster than they could control it. Judge Harold Whitman adjusted his robe nervously and looked toward Marcus Hale. This hearing is becoming inappropriate, he said quickly. If there is an active federal matter, then this courtroom is no longer the proper venue. Marcus remained calm. Actually, Judge, he replied, this courtroom is exactly why we are here. Whitman's face tightened immediately. Vanessa slowly reached into her folder once more and removed a printed timeline nearly 3 feet long when unfolded across the table. Dates, transfers, missing evidence logs, complaint numbers, internal review signatures. Mercer stared at it in silence. You build all this? He finally asked, his voice lower now. Vanessa looked at him steadily. No, she answered softly. You did. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered faintly while thunder rolled again outside across downtown Richmond. Marcus Hale stepped closer to the timeline and pointed towards several highlighted entries. 6 civilian complaints dismissed without investigation, he said evenly. 3 missing body camera files. 2 officers transferred immediately after internal review. His finger stopped on Mercer's name, and 1 recurring supervisor signature approving all of it. Judge Whitman swallowed hard. Mercer shook his head quickly. You are twisting paperwork to fit some narrative. Vanessa leaned forward slightly for the first time all morning. Then explain why every officer connected to my brother's case received commendations within 30 days. Mercer opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. The silence answered for him. Vanessa continued calmly. You thought nobody would notice patterns because families like mine were supposed to stay quiet. Her voice never rose. That made every sentence heavier. You counted on grief making people tired. Somewhere in the gallery, a woman quietly wiped tears from her eyes. Another man lowered his head into his hands. The room no longer felt like a courtroom hearing. It felt like something being exposed in real time. Marcus Hale opened the digital recorder sitting on the table. A soft click echoed through the room before a voice crackled from the speaker. Delete the garage footage before records pulls it. Mercer's face drained instantly. The recording continued. Nobody is going to question it anyway. Vanessa never looked away from him while the audio played. Nobody else moved either. Judge Whitman stared downward at the bench as though refusing to make eye contact with anyone might somehow separate him from what he was hearing. When the recording stopped, the silence afterward felt almost unbearable. Mercer finally forced out a nervous laugh, but it sounded hollow now. Audio can be manipulated, he muttered weakly. Marcus Hale nodded once. That is true. He reached into the briefcase again and removed another file, thicker this time. Which is why we also subpoenaed phone records, dispatch archives, payroll transfers, and private communications from Richmond Central Precinct. Mercer's breathing visibly changed. Faster now. Less controlled. Vanessa noticed that too. And for the first time since entering the courtroom that morning, Daniel Mercer realized this was never a grieving woman chasing answers. This was an operation that had been quietly closing around him for months. The entire courtroom sat trapped inside a silence, so heavy it almost felt physical. Nobody moved after the recording ended. Nobody whispered. Even the old fluorescent lights humming above the benches seemed quieter now, as though the building itself was listening. Officer Daniel Mercer stood near the prosecution table staring at the digital recorder with a face that no longer resembled the arrogant officer who had mocked Vanessa Cole earlier that morning. The swagger was gone. The smirk was gone. All that remained was calculation and fear fighting for control behind his eyes. Vanessa watched him carefully, her expression calm enough to feel almost unsettling. She had spent months preparing for this moment, studying every report, every deleted file, every suspicious transfer hidden beneath layers of paperwork and silence. But the thing Mercer still did not understand was that this hearing had never been about convincing him. It had been about exposing him in front of everyone else. Judge Harold Whitman suddenly pushed back from the bench. This proceeding is suspended immediately, he announced sharply, his voice rising for the first time all morning. All parties will exit the courtroom until further notice. But before anyone could move, Marcus Hale calmly reached into his jacket pocket and placed a folded authorization letter onto the bench. That will not be necessary, he said evenly. Whitman froze. Marcus unfolded the document slowly beneath the courtroom lights. Federal insignias lined the top of the page beside multiple signatures. Under authorization from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, Marcus continued, this courtroom has officially become part of an active federal inquiry as of 8:30 this morning. The room erupted into quiet confusion. Deputies exchanged nervous glances. The court reporter stopped typing entirely. One woman near the back pulled out her phone before another officer quickly asked her to put it away. Mercer looked directly at Vanessa now. Who are you? He asked quietly. It was the first honest question he had asked all day. Vanessa slowly stood from her chair. The movement alone seemed to tighten the air inside the courtroom. She closed the folder carefully, then reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and removed a leather credential wallet. Dark blue, gold seal, official. She placed it gently onto the table between them. Marcus Hale stepped slightly aside as though the room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to her now. Vanessa opened the credential wallet with steady hands. Federal identification reflected beneath the fluorescent lights. Special Investigator Vanessa Cole, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice. Nobody spoke. Mercer stared at the badge in complete silence while the color slowly drained from his face. Judge Whitman lowered himself back into his chair as if his knees no longer trusted him to stand. Vanessa finally looked directly at Mercer again, but her voice remained calm, almost painfully controlled. "You spent 2 years believing nobody important was watching," she said softly. "That was your first mistake." Mercer swallowed hard. "You planned this." Vanessa held his gaze without blinking. "No," she answered quietly. "You planned it yourself the moment you believed power made you untouchable." Rain crashed harder against the courthouse windows now, while distant thunder rolled over Richmond like a warning arriving too late. Marcus Hale opened the briefcase one final time and removed several arrest warrants sealed with federal markings. The sight of them sent visible panic through the room. Mercer stared at the documents, then back at Vanessa, finally understanding the truth that had been standing in front of him all morning. The woman he laughed at was never begging the system for justice. She was the one leading it. Nobody inside the courtroom seemed to remember how to breathe after Vanessa Cole revealed her credentials. The silence stretched across the room like something alive, pressing against every person sitting beneath the cold fluorescent lights. Officer Daniel Mercer remained frozen near the prosecution table, his eyes fixed on the federal badge, as though staring long enough might somehow change what it said. But it did not change. Nothing changed. Not the gold seal. Not the title beneath her name. Not the realization slowly sinking into the room that the woman they dismissed all morning had been investigating them the entire time. Marcus Hale calmly placed the stack of federal warrants onto the bench in front of Judge Harold Whitman. "These orders were approved at 6:15 this morning," he said evenly. "Multiple departments are already executing coordinated searches as we speak." Whitman's hands visibly trembled as he looked through the paperwork. "This cannot be happening," he whispered under his breath. Vanessa watched him quietly. "Actually," she replied softly, "it has been happening for a long time." Outside the courtroom, distant footsteps suddenly echoed through the courthouse hallway. Fast, organized, purposeful. Several people inside the gallery turned toward the doors just as two federal agents entered wearing dark jackets marked with Department of Justice insignias. The atmosphere shifted instantly from courtroom hearing to active operation. Mercer finally found his voice again. "This is political," he snapped, though the panic underneath his words was impossible to hide now. "You are using your position because you are angry." Vanessa slowly walked toward him, stopping only a few feet away. Her expression never changed. "You still do not understand," she said quietly. "This stopped being personal the moment we discovered how many cases disappeared under your department." Mercer shook his head quickly. "You have nothing tying me directly to any crime." Marcus Hale opened another folder. "Actually, we do." He removed printed bank records, transfer authorizations, internal messages, and signed disciplinary suppression forms. One by one, he laid them across the table beneath the courtroom lights while every person in the room watched in silence. Mercer's face tightened further with each page. "Several officers already agreed to cooperate," Marcus continued. "Some of them gave statements less than 48 hours ago." That hit Mercer harder than anything else so far. Betrayal always did. Vanessa noticed his shoulders sink slightly for the first time all morning. The man who once filled the room with arrogance now looked smaller somehow, diminished beneath the weight of exposure. Judge Whitman suddenly removed his glasses and rubbed both hands across his face. "My God," he muttered quietly. Vanessa looked toward him. "People begged this courtroom for fairness for years," she said. "Most of them walked out believing nobody ever listened." Rain slammed against the courthouse windows while thunder rolled above Richmond again, deeper this time, almost drowning out the sound of approaching sirens outside. One of the federal agents stepped toward Mercer calmly. "Officer Daniel Mercer," he said professionally, "you are being placed under federal investigation pending charges related to obstruction, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Mercer looked around the room desperately, as if expecting somebody to defend him the way they always had before. But the officers along the wall avoided eye contact. The judge remained silent. Even the courtroom staff stared downward at their desks. Vanessa stood perfectly still while Mercer slowly realized the system that protected him was collapsing right in front of him. And the most terrifying part was not the warrants, the agents, or even the investigation itself. It was the fact that the quiet black woman he laughed at had seen all of this coming long before he ever walked into that courtroom. By the time the hearing finally ended, The storm over Richmond had swallowed the entire city in gray rain and flashing lights. News vans lined the streets outside the courthouse, while reporters crowded behind barricades trying to understand how an ordinary case review had turned into one of the largest federal corruption investigations the city had seen in years. Inside the building, the atmosphere felt hollow now, stripped of the arrogance and certainty that once filled those hallways. Officers who had spent years walking through the courthouse with confidence suddenly avoided eye contact. Court staff whispered behind closed doors. Phones rang endlessly from offices upstairs while federal agents moved carefully from room to room carrying evidence boxes and sealed files. But through all the noise, Vanessa Cole remained calm. She stood alone near one of the courthouse windows watching rain slide slowly down the glass while the reflection of red and blue emergency lights flickered across her face. Behind her, Marcus Hale quietly closed the final case folder. "It is over," he said softly. Vanessa did not answer right away. Her eyes remained fixed on the crowded street below, where people hurried beneath umbrellas through puddles glowing under city lights. "No," she finally replied. "It is finally beginning." Marcus studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. He understood what she meant. For 2 years, Jordan Cole's name had existed only inside forgotten reports, buried complaints, and quiet family grief. But now the truth attached to his case had become impossible to hide. Several officers were already under suspension. Internal records were being reopened. Federal reviews had expanded beyond Richmond into neighboring counties. And somewhere inside holding rooms and interrogation offices across the city, people who once felt untouchable were suddenly learning what accountability sounded like. Vanessa gently picked up the old photograph of her brother from the table beside her. The edges were worn soft from being carried for so long. Jordan smiling beneath summer sunlight beside that neighborhood basketball court. Young, kind, alive. She traced her thumb lightly across the corner of the picture before slipping it carefully back into her folder. "He used to believe people were good," she said quietly. Marcus looked toward her. "And you?" Vanessa took a slow breath. "I believe people reveal who they are when they think nobody important is watching." The words lingered heavily between them. Down the hallway, Officer Daniel Mercer was escorted quietly through a side exit away from the cameras waiting outside. No laughter followed him now. No confidence. No badge protecting him from consequences anymore. Just silence. The same silence families like Vanessa's had lived with for years. Marcus stepped closer beside her near the window. "You could have exposed yourself months ago," he said. "Why wait?" Vanessa watched the rain for several seconds before answering. "Because men like Mercer never destroy themselves when they feel threatened," she replied softly. "They destroy themselves when they feel safe." Somewhere outside, thunder rolled low across the city one final time. Vanessa closed the folder in her hands and walked slowly toward the courthouse doors. Reporters immediately shouted questions the moment she appeared outside, cameras flashing against the rain-soaked steps, but she never stopped walking. Her expression remained steady as she disappeared into the storm beneath the glow of city lights. And inside that courthouse, long after the cameras left and the headlines faded, one truth continued echoing through every empty hallway and courtroom bench. The most dangerous thing about silence is that people mistake it for weakness right before the truth finally speaks.